Our therapy team looks at the clinical metrics. That whole thing, evals, visits, revenue per visit, PT revenue per visit, unit per visit, all the way down through the CPT codes. And that's the numbers that I go over every quarter when I do our offsite directors meeting with the directors. That takes up about 25% of that meeting, is just going over these numbers, understanding them, and then looking at why they might have changed for better or for worse. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata, talks to Justin Stiver, the owner of Total Therapy Florida. Justin grew the practice from 1 to now 7 clinics across Florida. Paul and Justin talk through the key metrics Justin tracks throughout his 7 clinics, how to track financial and clinical data, how frequently to review various metrics, why sharing data and being transparent with your team is so important, and lastly, Justin put together a PDF that lists the key metrics he loves to track. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
It's not only important to track what physicians are sending you business, but what physicians are sending you quality leads too. Because there are physicians, and we're in the middle of it right now with the mobile team, is we have a couple physicians that are bogging our mobile team down with referrals, but they're sending us 15 to 1 of the Blue Cross Blue Shield patients that we get paid $65 per visit on, and we really don't want, so because with mobile, you can't double book people. You can't see 2 people in a short time slot because you have to drive to their house. So we're having those conversations with these physicians. We actually have had this week and said, like, look, you guys love us, obviously, because you send us a bunch of people, but what's happening? Why are we getting 1 Medicare patient per every 15 or 18 Blue Cross Blue Shield patients? And the answer is that somewhere in that physician's office, someone making the decision is saying, like, okay, they're the only ones that take this one, so let's send every one of these. And we had to reverse engineer their thought process and say, like, hey, don't just give us all those, or else we're not going to be able to keep taking them, basically. So we had a great conversation this week with those 2 docs, and they sat down there and said, look, their teams, you need to start sending Total Therapy all the Medicare patients too. So without that data, though, I never would have even known that. Something's wrong, but the only thing I would have known at best is that our P&Ls are getting crushed by mobile. I'm like, why is mobile underperforming here? And so to have this data, you have to be able to compare both the financial data to the clinical data and make informed decisions on that there. So back to the other one, I decided to do a month-to-month comparison, and which is impossible when you're doing a trailing 12-month, because you're only going to have the next month to compare to the previous month. You're not going to have the same month the previous year, which is actually more important in some ways, because our business, we have all these snowbirds coming in and then leaving. So if we compared March to April and April to May, we would think that our business is falling apart, when it's not. It's just that we're actually losing that 30% snowbird volume that we always lose. So we just want to make sure that it's doing well compared to our drop that we had the previous year, basically.
Right. Not to switch gears, but just a quick question here. In one of the other episodes, you talked about sharing some of these stats with your team. Is that kind of this sheet or a version of this sheet? Like just high level, like, is it like, who's looking at this sheet when you put it together every month? This
whole sheet is just for the partners. Our therapy team looks at the clinical metrics. That whole thing, which is evals, visits, revenue per visit, PT revenue per visit, unit per visit, all the way down through the CPT codes. And that's the numbers that I go over every quarter when I do our offsite directors meeting with the directors. That takes up about 25% of that meeting, is just going over these numbers, understanding them, and then looking at why they might have changed for better or for worse. And let's try and figure out what you guys can do to help these numbers out. We don't necessarily put the whole thing on their plates. We don't want to overwhelm them with all these things. We want to keep them focused on what they can change.
Yep. Again, like I look at these things, it totally makes sense. Just looking at it top to bottom on the sheet, it just sort of makes sense. Just in just jumping around in here, when you look at, so like, for example, clinical metrics, I think I know why you've picked those 4 codes right there at the bottom of that section. But can you just talk really briefly, like, why is it those 4 codes, as opposed to 2 of those codes or 3 other codes? Like, what is it about those 4 codes that you like to look at?
Those 4 codes are the most commonly billed in our company. There are other codes that we bill for, but those are the ones that you're actually choosing between when you're doing a PT visit. You're not choosing between an eval code and this code, because if it's an eval, you have to bill that eval code. And all the eval codes, whether it's low, medium, or high complexity, they all pay the same, but also you have to bill if it's you have to bill accurately with those. When it comes to these other CPT codes, there is some degree of therapist choice when it comes to what you want to bill for. So the way that so we want to make sure that our therapists understand the difference in what Medicare pays us for these codes. And we're not trying to tell our therapists that they have to bill the highest code all the time. We just want to make them know that, let them know that they do pay differently. And they're basically telling you that your time is worth less when you're doing manual therapy versus therapeutic activity. And we explain to them why that is. And we go into how Medicare actually values these codes with the RVUs and all that stuff, so that you can understand why. And the other thing is, in the background of this, we've already done a ton of education on CPT coding. In most cases, most PTs that start with us, especially the PTs that have worked in other places or been in the industry for longer periods of time, they have a lot of misconceptions to billing, and they've been taught the wrong way. The most common cliche is that you're going to do 3 TEs or 97110 and 1 manual therapy. And that's how everyone billed. And that's how everyone billed when I was coming up through school and everything else. Well, the funny thing is, if you look back 10, 15 years, 97110 was also the highest paid code out of those 4. So now 97110 is not one of the highest paid codes. So it was very easy to train someone back in the day, because not only is 97110 the highest paid code back in the day, but it was also the most broad encompassing code. It had things like, are you improving their strength, range of motion, endurance? It's an exercise, and casting that net, you could easily justify 97110 for almost anything that we do. But when you actually start looking into it, there's a lot of overlap when it comes to those major codes, especially 97110 therapeutic exercise, 97112 neuromuscular, and 97530 therapeutic activities. There's a lot of overlap, like a Venn diagram. And it all comes down to like what the intent of the therapist delivering that care. So what was your primary intent? And in a lot of cases, our primary intent of this specific exercise is not to improve someone's range of motion. Our primary intent is to improve someone's function. And you have to educate your team, like 97530 is a dynamic activity that's designed to improve functional performance. And that also encompasses a lot of what we do. So you're trying to educate your team to make the best informed decision to actually bill accurately, and explain to them that in the past that billing 97110 has been kind of just a cop-out and not letting you think as much. But
and to sort of connect the dots here a little bit, let's just say, I mean, if you're looking at this month over month for the trailing 24 months, you'll start to see some deviations here. But just kind of looking at just those CPT codes for just a minute, if you see a variation or some deviation happen where like all of a sudden 1 month it's trended away or something like that, where does that take you mentally? Are you like digging in to be like, okay, is one of my therapists in need of more training? Is our marketing or referral partnership sending us the wrong kind of client? Like how do you guys sort of decode that when you started investigating?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the referral source, I mean, in general, most of our patients require a lot of the same stuff. Most of them are weak and lack function, balance, etc. Whether it's from this doc or that doc. But what we usually do is we can recognize which clinics are billing this way or that way, and then we can drill down deeper and see like, okay, is it one specific therapist bringing down the averages for this clinic, or is it multiple? And then we go and we just kind of ask those questions that a well-informed therapist would be able to answer. And we say like, okay, explain to me your thought process when you're billing 97110 versus 97530. And then if they can't give you a good answer, then it's a good indication that they're billing the easier code to bill instead of doing thinking required. And then at that point, you have to educate them like it's important that if you justify it as this code, you should bill for that code, especially, that code happens to pay more. So if it takes a little bit more thinking to recognize that that is the proper way to actually code it, you should be doing that, because ultimately the value that you bring through your revenue earned is also directly correlated to the compensation that we can give you. So, but it's a very delicate conversation to have, because we want to stay completely within guidelines, above board, ethically and legally. And we also want to respect that the therapist does have the ability to do what they think is best for the patient. So we're not trying to push them in that direction. We're just trying to make sure they're educated, because most therapists that are billing a ton of 97110 versus 9753, but I'm in a clinic watching them treat, and I'm like, you're doing marching, you're doing step ups, you're doing things that are functional, and you're billing that as 97110. I know that's not the best way to bill it. So explain to me what your thought process was. And then they're like, well, that's just how I've always done it. That's how I was taught by my CI back in 1997, and you're like, okay, well, let's lay out Medicare's definition or AMA's definition of these codes, and let's talk about it. And most of them haven't looked at that, if ever, in a long time. And then they end up looking at it and saying, wow, this is crazy. I can't believe there's so much overlap. And this, I can't believe that. And then you say, okay, and by the way, this code just pay more. Then all of a sudden they start billing it more, and everything kind of returns to the average.
I'm always curious when I see sheets like this. I'm guessing you didn't start out this way. Like, you talked a little bit about this on the office hours, but you have a partner that kind of, I forget exactly how you said it, but you kind of talked about this idea that you have a partner who is more on the business side. But like, if we were to I don't know, time travel back 5 years or something like that, you said at the beginning of this that it kind of evolves, and sometimes things drop off this list and sometimes things make it on this list. But just speaking in generalities, like, at what point in the business of total therapy did you actually start tracking this? Was it when you were going from one practice to two, or from 5 practices to 6? I'm curious, like, what level of rigor, like, where did this level of rigor start?
Well, it's been on the financial side. It's been from the very beginning. And my partner had operated a high business level. He brought his company public and went through all that. He had obviously a large business that kept good books, and through his experience realized how important that is. And when we started Total Therapy Florida, it was never even a question. It was just like, okay, who are we going to have as our CFO or our bookkeeper or whoever, because we need to have this accurately done every single month. And I was I remember when we first started talking about it, and the dynamic was, I'm the physical therapist who is budding young businessly minded person that wants to learn, but I don't have that yet. and he's the experienced, savvy business person. So in my head, when he starts talking about things that I know are probably right, but I don't know anything about, I just kind of keep my mouth shut and say, okay, yeah, of course we need a bookkeeper that,
Of
gives
course.
us monthly P&Ls and, everything else. So, but, I just kind of went along with that, knowing that that was the right decision. And then my eyes got opened as we started making decisions on the company, being able to reference back and seeing these numbers evolve monthly, and that some big decisions that we've made have been like, okay, our revenue is growing by X%. Our referrals, should we hire this person that's going to cost us X amount of dollars to boost business? Okay, well, yes, we should. And was that hire good after 1 year? Let's look back, and it's in the actual numbers. You can actually compare that. But I've always been a data junkie, and honestly, on the clinical side, I've always been obsessed with the numbers and how they relate to each other. And that's one of the reasons why I dropped one of our first EMRs, is because the reporting structure was just terrible, and I couldn't pull the numbers out of it that I wanted. So I was actually spreadsheeting and counting on my schedule. Every week I was spending an hour or two every Friday afternoon, counting evals and counting visits and doing stuff that I was like, this is ridiculous. This is there. Why can't they give me this? And then finally they rolled out like some kind of analytics thing, and then it wasn't matching what I was counting. And I'm like, wait, I can't trust this, So then I was like, forget it. I'm done. Like I have to find some system that's reliable and accurate and is customizable too, because that's the other thing. You have to be able to customize this to fit your business's needs. And every practice is a little bit different. So you got to be careful in a system where you can't customize that too.
Right. Okay. So I mean, I could go like super, super deep in here, but I'm trying to like maybe keep it high level here. But you've always been like really open about this, but if you change your mind, that's okay. So in one of the other episodes we did, you talked about exposing some of this data, or some version or subset of this data, all the way down to the clinician level. And I don't mean down like in a weird way. I just, you know what I mean? It's like, you talked about like in one of the other episodes, you said something like, everybody wants a raise, but the conversation is a lot easier when you kind of show them what they've sort of brought in as well. So I think in that episode, I also asked you like how often they see it. And I think what you said was like, well, your business partner might look at it every month with you, or, and even today you talked about like sort of an offsite that you do as well. But with like your, a clinician at one of your locations or a PT assistant at one of your locations or whatever, they're probably seeing it once a quarter, or how often are you kind of going over these numbers with them?
So our clinic directors, the way we're structured, we have one director that oversees 3 or 4 physical therapists underneath that person. We have a pretty deep dive into the clinical data and the future of the company and where we're headed and things like that are very important to make people understand. And we also seek their input on it. It's not a one-way valve either. We're getting everyone's take on things, and then we're probably coming back the next meeting and saying like, hey, we all kind of talked about this last time, and after you guys brought up some excellent points, we decided to go in this direction here, and here's how we're going to roll it out. Here's what we need from you. And so it's a round table type of discussion, and it does a couple things. It gives them the key data that they want to see to help them then pass it down to their team members through training. So, if it is CPT coding, if it's units per visit, if it's maximizing missed opportunities, which is that is not on here, but that's something that we do track. Is kind of a made up metric that's called missed opportunities. And that's a big one. And I'll explain that. But we're basically showing them what's going on in the clinics. And what's awesome is that we can compare it clinic to clinic, because if you have one clinic or 2 clinics, it's so easy for that person to be like, no, that's impossible. It's just, we're trying as hard as we can. And trust me, like we can never get this metric down to this or up to that. I'm like, okay, that's interesting you say that, because 5 of the other 7 clinics are performing at that way. And, I'm not trying to hold it over your head, but I think maybe there's an opportunity that we can hear what these other clinic directors are doing, and let's put them on the spot. Let's hear their pitches when it comes to selling laser or or this, and let's ask them what their patient coordinator is doing to convince their patients that call us and say, hey, I'm sore today, I don't want to come in, or my husband has this appointment. And what's the, what is Debbie doing differently than this other person to cut your cancellation rate in half, because you're only 5 miles away. So, is it, and that lets us just dive down deep and have these detailed conversations. And it's also the conversation that our clinic directors want to have, because everyone wants to excel, and it kind of breeds that competitive nature that most of them love anyway. We sell laser, and it's the best thing when 3 or 4 clinics are like neck and neck. Oh, they sold 10,000, they're at 11,000. Oh, okay, we got 3 weeks left, let's pass them up. They're competitive on it, and it's fun. It's a little game, and but it also brings a lot of important details to it. So those meetings, we spend 5 hours plus each quarter with the directors. We spend about an hour and a half going over the KPIs. We spend an hour discussing a director of education topic. We have one director who's in charge of clinical education, which is very important for our team. So he's giving his presentation on a specific topic, and then that next time period, we're rolling out kind of those things to our team. Whether it's vestibular or upper level TMJ treatment, something like that. And then the last kind of hour and a half or so, we're talking about the game within the game, and what we can do as a team to improve the KPIs and then move forward as a company. So it's really fun. Everyone looks forward to it. And then they're bringing that down to their team mostly through what we call the weekly tactical meeting. And that's an hour and 15-minute meeting done every Wednesday, where the whole team has lunch and they kind of eat it while they talk about all the expiring plan of cares and the new patients that came in. And then they're spending 15 or 20 minutes kind of chipping away at the training side of the things that we talked about at the last big meeting offsite. It's a really good way to kind of tie all the multiple spots that we have, back into one entity. So if Osprey is doing something better than Venice, let's figure out why, and now let's figure out how to get Venice up to speed. And it's just raising that bar, and the team loves it.
Man, I love this. Like, I think, and I mean this with all the respect in the world, I think you probably, because you and your team have been doing this for years, you probably, sort of take this for granted, and in your head, it's probably like, God, how are people not doing this?
Yeah.
And I think about on the other side of it, I feel like I can count on one hand the number of practice owners I've met in the last 12 months that have this level of rigor. And you can kind of see, like, that, and I don't want to like offend anybody, but there's a common pattern. Like, the most successful practice owners understand that their business can be measured, with sheets like this. And then there's practice owners that don't. And the financial outcomes for those two groups are very obvious. It's very correlated.
And it's also important to kind of, to say that, it's not, we had this discussion about, like, how do we, do we give away all these secrets? Do we talk about this openly? And, the thing is that I don't mind talking about it, because I know it's not an easy thing to do, and no matter, you can talk about it all you want, but until you start going there and doing it, and honestly, and nothing there, it's not a textbook that can just be taken and shared and do it. It's going to be different for everybody. Not everyone has the same exact business as I do. So it's not going to translate accurately. It's more of the mindset that it takes versus the actual details of the spreadsheet. This is not some golden spreadsheet that you're going to be able to take and say, wow, now I got my hands on this holy grail spreadsheet. My business is going to grow to $5 million. It's not, that's not the case at all.
Man, Thomas and I were going to just name this the golden spreadsheet or whatever and market it. But now you've taken that wind out of our sails.
Yeah, sorry. It's not. But the other thing is we're talking, I would be lying if I said a lot of the energy I put behind these meetings that we do wouldn't be in order to increase employee retention and employee buy-in as well, improve culture, because the team loves being involved in a company that thinks this way, and they feel like they're a part of a team, which they should, that cares about the patients, that cares about the direction that this ship is moving in, and they feel like they have a say in it. So, and I think you'd be a pretty terrible business owner if you didn't care what your employees have to say.
Right.
Right.
So
it's a system that allows for us to get what they have to say and act on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to be respectful of your time here, but one other question about this: does this level? So obviously on the one side, like this level of transparency and this level of data, obviously makes it easier to run the business. I think you've kind of said that a couple different ways already. I don't know how to ask this question, but in order for somebody to actually be able to look at this data, like, okay, I'll just ask the blunt question and then hopefully people won't think I just know I'm coming from a good place. How does this change your recruiting? Like, because not every clinician is thinking about, because most clinicians probably don't see this level of financial data coming, down from the ownership of the practice. This has got to be a pretty rare thing. I got to imagine that when you're somewhere in your recruiting process or your like 90-day review process or something, people are probably expressing some discomfort. So can you just talk about that? Like in your experience, like does this level of transparency does help operate the business, but does it hurt recruiting? Does it actually help recruiting? Like what's your experience been?
Well, we don't,
measuring like this.
To be fair, we don't expose a ton of it to staff level therapists and things. We show them what their performance means to the company, which I do think is kind of controversial. If you were to get 10 successful practice owners together, I don't think you would have agreement that you should expose, how much revenue everybody's making you. However, I would say in the PT field, our, margins are comparatively small enough to where we'll probably want to expose it. So our employees like understand that we're not all getting rich here, so,
yeah.
But, when you look at, you could just Google like, oh, how much does this specialty in healthcare make versus how much they get paid? And every specialty of healthcare is a different number. And inside of physical therapy, every physical therapy business is a different number. We're different than, a lot of other companies. And one of our things was that we struggled with was we want to attract the best talent. We want to deliver the best care. We want to have nice facilities. How do we do that and not lose our butts because we're tied to the same insurance reimbursement that the guy down the street is? So it happens to be that our plan was to grow our brand so strong that we could start to have choice when it comes to what payers we're accepting, when it comes to what we set our self-pay rates at, when it comes to making sure that we're so busy that we have a wait list of people. When someone cancels, we can fill them. All those numbers play directly into profitability. And so it's not as simple as it sounds. You have to factor all that into it. You might be afraid to spend a little bit extra money on business development. But if you looked at how many times this year when we've had a cancellation, we were able to fill it, and that number's in the thousands, and we get, $100 per visit, then all of a sudden that business development person doesn't sound too bad. And that's a metric. I bet you no one's tracking that. Who's tracking percentage of filled cancellations out there? Who's doing that on a large scale? I don't know, but I know that we have a thousands of times per year where we fill those cancellations because we have a wait list. And I know what that looks with our cash flow, and I know what that does, to the whole lines. Top line, bottom line of the P&L is, and I think profits are made in this business in those pockets where most people aren't even really looking.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Man, I love this. And I think if it's all right with you, we are going to include the PDF in the show notes. Is that okay with you? You can always change your mind later too if you want to think about it.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, this is all the good thing about this is all data that you guys, if they have Strata, I mean, they're already accessing this data anywhere. It's right in front of them. So, and if they have a P&L, they already have that other data right in front of them. So it's not really rocket science here, but, so yeah, I have no problem. I don't feel like giving away this is a secret. I think it's just basics,
I love it, man.
The magic is the conversations that happen between the decision makers in the practice around these numbers. I mean, we have some amazing conversations and ideas and things that, going back to the first time we ever shot one of these podcasts when we talked about buying that duplex to house students. I mean, like that decision was made off of this spreadsheet when we talk about, this data, when you're looking at hiring expenses and what's the biggest headwind to growing the top line? Well, we're in a staff-based business where we have to have staff to deliver services to get revenue, and we're having a hard time hiring. So how do we solve that problem? And all those problems were figured out on the spreadsheet, but none of the solutions are given on the spreadsheet. So that's up to the practice owner.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.